Okay.
This is Dinesh Mohan. Namaste from India. It is 6:30 in the evening in India. I'd like to welcome all of you to this series on behalf of the Independent Council for Road Safety International, which ICoRSI in short, and the Institute of Research and Development in Prevention of Violence, Promotion of Social Living, CISALVA, at the Universidad de Val. I would also like to welcome all of you to the ICoRSI Global Dialogues on Road Safety. We had scheduled an annual ICoRSI International Road Safety Conference in Cali last July, but had to cancel it because of all the reasons all of you know about. So we thought that instead of the international conference, which we had planned for 4 days in Cali in July, we'll go international in another way by holding this webinar series. We have arranged 12 sessions on road safety dialogue, including 24 internationally known road safety experts over the next 3 weeks. In particular, I would like to welcome Mr. Lota to our first session. He will be giving the opening address. Mr. Lota is the director of the National Road Safety Agency in Colombia and has been an advisor at urban transport for many years. And also what I really like, a teacher in universities and associated with the National University in Colombia. Thank you very much for joining us. We also have with us in the opening session, Mr. Barry Sheerman, Member of Parliament in UK. He's much more important as Chairperson of ICoRSI. So we welcome Barry to the series. We also like to welcome all our council members and advisors from all the countries which are joining us. We established ICoRSI because we had concerns that many groups and countries around the world and even international agencies were not following the science-based road safety interventions, which we have known for many years. So we thought we'll have a group which helps people knowing what science tells us. And as ICoRSI, we maintain our independence by not accepting contributions, financial contributions from organizations which may be seen as compromising our integrity and independence of opinion. These series of webinars have been organized to discuss some of these issues in front of an international audience. We are particularly delighted that none of the experts we approached to speak at this series declined our invitation. And we are really sincerely thank them and appreciate their efforts to join us. For the past 1 year, ICoRSI has also been working in collaboration with Campbell to develop an evidence and gap map of studies ever published on the effectiveness of road safety interventions. We have searched through over about 100,000 studies and cataloged them, and we have selected 2,000 out of 100,000, which we think meet the scientific criteria for scientists to see what works in road safety. And that's very interesting, that of 100,000, we could find 2,000 published studies, which we can actually use for policy making. And we will be publishing the detailed results of our work as ICoRSI at the end of this year. I'll share it with the rest of the world. We would like to engage all of you in this adventure for generation of more theory and knowledge. If we do not do this, it will be very difficult for most societies to think of vision zero as a vision. Road safety is a relatively young science compared to other sciences, and a great deal of work needs to be done to for this science to reach maturity. Our evidence and gap map results indicate that the scientifically valid studies emanate only from a few countries in the world. We are quite excited that over 400 professionals have registered for this series. And we hope that this series will excite a few of them to establish research teams in different parts of the world. In this series, we want to discuss what we know and what we don't know about road safety research, policy making, and solutions. We hope that this will help us go forward in a more meaningful way in promoting road safety around the world. Before closing, I would like to thank Professor Maria Gutierrez and her colleagues at CISALVA, putting in a huge amount of work to get this program going, and also the University of Chicago for their support in putting this together. I would like to now invite Barry, Chairperson ICoRSI, to make his opening remarks.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Dinesh, you and I started, like all good things, a conspiracy some years ago together, and we were meeting on a fairly irregular basis, usually in London, and we started talking about, wouldn't it be a good idea if we started an organization that brought into contact all the researchers across the world in road safety. And as we developed that idea, we refined it, polished it, and eventually we, I think, decided to launch ICoRSI. By that time, others were of the plot, conspiring to all of us be on board for the interesting journey that we were beginning. Lovely to see Peggy. Hello, Peggy. So we started this idea as a little plot, and like all good plots, we widened the circle. And the more we talked about what we wanted to achieve, the more people said, absolutely wonderful idea, let us do it. And you know that as a politician, I have always been passionate about having campaigns that I represent in Parliament and I campaign for globally, based on good science, good research, or what works in other countries that we can learn from. And that was the basis that we started talking. And if you remember, I suppose the one frustration was, as we developed the idea, was that we had to make sure that this was open to anyone, anywhere in the world that was passionate about our ambition and our goal. The fact of the matter was, of course, we were restricted by the need to travel. And if you remember, our very first conference was in Hungary, as I remember, Dinesh, because you had worked out brilliantly with the team that was the cheapest place to hold a conference and travel to at that time. We were in Budapest. And highly successful it was because it brought together the plotters and the planners, and we reunited our resolve to do this properly. And also, we did another interesting thing. We vented our frustration that you had to get on a plane to go and visit. And of course, many people we're communicating this week with people familiar with all the attempts we've had at global influence. Myself, I joined the Global Road Safety Partnership, eventually became chairman of that organization, and we all know the difficulties that the Global Road Safety World Bank Initiative encountered. We also know that at present, we are very pleased that World Health Organization now are supporting global legislators for road safety, again, which I now chair, but also deeply frustrated because you have to keep going on airplanes and going to regional centers around the world in order to take our message. And I remember only back in February, when we were, most of us in Stockholm, I was venting my irritation and frustration. There was no method I knew where we could all communicate across the world without traveling. And hey presto, we have the COVID coronavirus crisis. And suddenly we all discover Zoom and all the other methods of doing just this. If you recall, in that Stockholm conference, the ministerial conference, there was one moment where we in parallel had the ICoRSI launch of the very research that you have pointed to, Dinesh, in terms of this absolutely wonderful achievement that our group had organized the total evaluation of all the road safety research going back 60 years and evaluating it, cross-referencing it, peer reviewing it. And when we announced that to the main auditorium in Stockholm at the ministerial meeting, I think a lot of people were absolutely amazed that we had done that. And if you recall, the one chance I got to talk at the main conference, I pointed out that there were some people, and I mentioned Bloomberg, who thought we didn't need any more research. And and I said, I believe the research is only just beginning. And we've so much to do. And you remember that? And it is, research is vital that it carries on and develops and we learn from each other's research, collaborate in research projects and all the rest. Now, my guilty secret is I'm not a scientist, but I am in training at the London School of Economics. Both my degrees were in social science. And I do actually believe that behavioral sciences can make a very big difference into the sort of thing that we do in ICoRSI. I don't want to keep the meeting any longer, but we now have the original passion. We have a wonderful network that we've built up laboriously over these last few years. And we have a feeling, I think, of trust of each other's quality and contribution and ability to deliver the work. So I thought the seminal moment was actually in Stockholm, where we came together, we showed what we can do in terms of sharing with that ministerial conference what we had already achieved, and I think signaled that we have so much more that we can achieve. Last thing to repeat, we now have this medium to collaborate regularly, to exchange ideas regularly, to have conferences online regularly, and I think the world is basically our oyster. So I'm delighted. My job in terms of trying to lead global legislators will be made so much easier, but the real passion that I originally had was from that small group of us still together achieving great things. So why are we doing it? Because it is wrong that so many children, young people, older people, so many people die unnecessarily around the world. And as we know, road accidents still the biggest killer of children and young people globally. Now, there is much to do and we must get on with it. So you don't need anything more from me except I remain fully committed to the plot, to expanding it, bringing people in when we see we have an empty chair, there's an expertise we need. We can now go out and find that person with that expertise. Now, I will be talking later in the conference about the politics relationship between politics and the research. That's enough for me today, except that this is one of the most useful, enjoyable, and fun organizations I've ever had a hand in launching. Thank you all for all the work you've done so far. And now we can roll up our sleeves and really do a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. You are always so infectious in addition to COVID. So you're inspiring, and I like the life behind your words. And now I'd like to inform Mr. Lota that our organization has members and advisors from every continent in the world at present. And we are really grateful that you joined us in the opening session. And I'd like to invite you to give your inaugural address. Thank you. Mr. Lota, can you come on, please?
Excuse me. Bueno, I will speak Spanish. En primer lugar, un gran día para todos. Reciban un afectuoso saludo de la ministra de Transporte. Disculpen, no voy a compartir rápidamente un balance de nuestra situación para poner en contexto sobre lo que estamos haciendo en Colombia y cómo para nosotros es muy importante la seguridad vial en términos de estos diálogos, de cómo hablar y cómo ver desde diferentes aspectos qué está pasando en seguridad vial. En primer lugar, cómo estamos en mortalidad durante este año. 3.596 personas han perdido la vida en siniestros viales en Colombia durante este año 2020 en comparación con 4.761 en el año inmediatamente anterior. Y lo decía el senador, y que sea este el paso para agradecerle por todo el trabajo que hace, lo mismo que Dinesh y todas las personas que están trabajando durante este diálogo en esta semana o en estas semanas. Nos aislamos durante un tiempo y marzo, abril, mayo, junio fueron meses en donde hubo una reducción en mortalidad, no en los mismos niveles en que hubiéramos querido que se hubiera generado esa reducción en materia de fallecimientos. ¿Cómo ha sido esto? En la parte de abajo pueden encontrar la reducción en materia de congestión, es decir, cuánto nos redujimos en Colombia en materia de movilidad. Y en las barras, cómo está la reducción en materia de mortalidad. Indudablemente, hubiéramos querido que fuera mucho más. Por cada 10 vehículos logramos salvar en septiembre una vida, por cada 10 vehículos que se redujeron, logramos salvar una vida. En el resto del periodo fueron 6 personas por cada 10 vehículos. Muy similar a lo que tuvimos en países de la región. Sigue siendo nuestro motociclista el principal actor vial vulnerable, 83% son hombres. Y aquí en esto sí que es importante lo que decía el senador. Esta es nuestra matriz de colisiones, nuestra matriz de choque, nuestra matriz de interacciones. Y cómo entender que el principal, o cómo entender la investigación como elemento fundamental para poder tomar decisiones y aplicar tecnologías y metodologías ajustadas a nuestras propias condiciones y a nuestra realidad sí que es fundamental. Entender que en Colombia nuestro motociclista muere principalmente por temas asociados a exceso de velocidad o manejo de frenos o condiciones de infraestructura que generan choque contra objeto fijo, es muy importante para poder plantear investigación. Y por eso nuestra política, que si bien ya viene desde el 2011 trabajándose en seguridad vial en Colombia, somos conscientes de que hay que seguir trabajando porque las metas del decenio no se cumplieron y hay que continuar en ello. ¿Cómo lo estamos planteando? Evidentemente, como se dijo en Estocolmo, estamos convencidos del enfoque de sistema seguro, de la visión cero, entendiendo la fragilidad del ser humano, entendiendo ese impacto que puede generar o cómo el impacto puede generar problemas hacia esta persona, pero adicionalmente que puede cometer errores. ¿Cómo son los errores de América Latina? Aquí sí que es importante aterrizar en estos diálogos que vamos a tener durante estos días, cómo traemos este tipo de enfoques particularmente a nuestras propias condiciones, como las vías seguras, las velocidades seguras, los vehículos seguros y los usuarios seguros son fundamentales. En ese sentido hay que recordar cuáles eran nuestras metas, que hay que reformularlas a 2030 con base en lo que sucedió en Estocolmo, y en ese sentido repensar cómo actuamos en nuestros pilares de seguridad vial, cómo desde esa gestión institucional, trabajando con los diferentes sectores públicos y privados, podemos generar realmente un impacto muy importante en materia de uno de los mensajes claves de Estocolmo, la corresponsabilidad, cómo esa gestión institucional nos genera esas tareas. La infraestructura, estamos trabajando, ya les voy a contar en un segundo cómo estamos trabajando en infraestructura en el país. En comportamiento humano es fundamental pensar en ese papel reflexivo que deben tener los seres humanos al momento de ser conductores, pero también cómo el sistema los protege para evitar la mortalidad. Atención a víctimas para nosotros es un tema fundamental, cómo se vuelve la víctima el eje central de la política de seguridad vial. Y finalmente, vehículos seguros. Estamos ya con el proyecto de ley próximo a entregar al Congreso para adherirnos al protocolo del 58 inicialmente vamos a trabajar como Colombia en esa armonización de nuestra normatividad a nivel mundial, pero primero también queremos tener unos usuarios bien informados, y yo creo que una de las tareas que yo les voy a pedir durante esta semana es ver cómo generamos procesos o cómo se puede generar procesos de formación y de información a nuestros diferentes usuarios en seguridad vial para que reconozcan que es un vehículo seguro. Para ir cerrando, tenemos que decir que Colombia tiene una serie de instrumentos que nos ha generado la norma, la ley, así como lo decía el congresista. Es muy importante también generar la legislación, y esto es la seguridad vial es una ciencia que además requiere de un acompañamiento de política pública, y en ese sentido todos esos instrumentos que están aquí, un consejo directivo que define cómo son las políticas de la entidad, un comité operativo en donde se trabaja en particular con las entidades del sector transporte en este país y generamos política pública en materia de infraestructura segura allí, es fundamental. Una comisión interministerial que nos garantiza que entre diferentes entidades del sector público podamos coordinar tareas. Los consejos territoriales, que ya les voy a hablar de ellos, el consejo consultivo que lo estamos integrando durante este año para poder reformular nuestra política de seguridad vial, y finalmente los comités locales. Los consejos territoriales, como les decía hace un momento, son un espacio, y como lo decía también el congresista, es muy importante entender las dinámicas de esta nueva normalidad, de este tipo de webinars en donde podemos conectarnos territorialmente. Estos consejos territoriales son juntas directivas para seguridad vial en cada departamento. Hicimos 5 presenciales antes de que iniciáramos todo el tema del aislamiento. Y de ahí hacia acá hemos hecho 27 para cerrar la primera ronda del país y poder hablar en todas las regiones de seguridad vial, con todos los gobernantes locales. Y hoy tenemos que decir que estamos ya trabajando en un nuevo proceso para el resto del año. Ya llevamos a hoy una segunda ronda con 11 consejos territoriales hechos ya virtualmente, y vamos a continuar con otros 21 en lo que queda del año para cerrar las discusiones en materia de seguridad vial en este 2020, en plantear unas estrategias y unos seguimientos en particular. Pero eso hay que tener claro cómo se vuelven metas, cómo trabajamos hacia el nivel del territorio en ponernos focos de manera contundente. Y en ese sentido, el Plan Nacional de Desarrollo nos dice que tenemos que pasar de máximo o de 6.850 fallecidos que tuvimos en 2018 a máximo 5.320 en 2022. En ese sentido, tenemos que generar la corresponsabilidad entre los diferentes actores. Y hoy, este año, tenemos que salvar 601 vidas en comparación con lo que sucedió el año inmediatamente anterior. Llevamos 1.165 vidas salvadas, pero este ejercicio se hace con cada departamento, con cada ciudad, de tal manera que todos tengamos la claridad de cuáles son nuestros objetivos, nuestras metas, nuestras tareas. Y yo creo que esta semana, estos diálogos que se están realizando o que se van a realizar durante estos días con ustedes, pues nos van a permitir aterrizar las políticas a nuestras necesidades. Lo que los invito, y quiero agradecer a todos los que se encuentran el día de hoy presentes, pero en particular a ICoRSI y por este espacio, por generar este tipo de diálogos regionales que son fundamentales, lo mismo que a la Universidad del Valle, fundamental actor para poder tener este diálogo, pero sobre todo quiero desde Colombia decir, para poder tomar decisiones, para poder plantear políticas, es muy importante lo que decía el senador, hay que basarnos en investigación, pero la investigación basada en el dato, basado en nuestra propia realidad, basado en cómo es nuestros comportamientos, para que así podamos tener y tomar decisiones adecuadas para que nuestras políticas realmente cambien y transformen los problemas de siniestralidad, porque como lo decían hace un momento, no podemos permitirnos que los jóvenes sigan falleciendo en siniestros viales y que sea nuestra principal causa de mortalidad de los niños, niñas y adolescentes. Eso es todo, y reciban un cordial saludo desde Colombia, esperando que sea un gran trabajo durante estos diálogos y que para América Latina, entendiendo todos estos espacios en particular, podamos contribuir al crecimiento de la política de seguridad vial en este continente, en esta subregión mejor, para que entre todos podamos salvar más vidas en las vías en este espacio. Muchas gracias y buen día para todos.
Thank you very much for joining us. And I think we've had a really interesting beginning to our series. Also, I think everything is working quite well because we are right on time and the software and the hardware is working well. So we can just thank our stars that everything going very well. And I'd like to end this opening session by thanking everyone who's joined us and everyone who's helped us in getting this going. And I would like to request now Andres and Hilda to take over the session for the next session. And everyone else except Andres and Hilda should switch off their videos. And it's over to Andres. You're the chairperson and you have 90 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dinesh, and thank you very much for the kind words, Barry and Mr. Lota. I think this event is really, really important. It sets us up from a global perspective to address a variety of issues that are of great importance on traffic safety. We will start this particular session with our colleague, Hilda María Gómez, who is going to introduce us a little bit about the topic of this problem of traffic safety in Latin America. I would like to encourage everyone, if you have questions during this particular session, to write them in the Q&A section of your monitors at the lower part on the right-hand side. By the interpretation, you will find a button called Q&A. You may pose your questions there and we will address them in order. I will, at this point, give the word to Hilda. Before that, we have divided her presentation. We'll have a series of topics, and we want to do this a little bit more interactively. So we will insert, try to make it a bit more of a dialogue, addressing a variety of issues, and go from there. Hilda, welcome. Thank you very much, and please, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Andres. Good morning and afternoon to everybody. I will start sharing my presentation. And first of all, thanking ICoRSI for the invitation to be part of this important event. I was very happy to go to Cali when it was physical, but now I'm very excited to be able to do it online. This is a wonderful opportunity. So the topic is the road safety in Latin America. What are the challenges and recommendations? I start with this to put in perspective the way I see what happens in Latin America. I think in Latin America, we have made progress in road safety, but still we need to work a lot much more in getting the whole population aware of the magnitude of the road safety problem. Now that we're living in the COVID time, we see that people are aware of COVID and of the risks and what needs to be done to avoid the risks. But in road safety, we still have that problem. The magnitude of what happens on the roads is not widely known by the population and not aware that there are solutions, there are vaccines. On COVID, we still don't have the vaccines. In road safety, we do have a lot of vaccines. We need to produce more, but we have. And I think this is very important. And the other thing that we need is to make road safety a national priority in our countries. That means in the public sector, but also in the private sector. This is not something of the public sector alone. It's all of the whole society. So as Andres mentioned, my presentation will have the first block, that is the current situation of road safety in the region, the challenges, and some recommendations. Starting with the first one, the current situation. Here you see that I have the data of fatalities from 2011 to 2017. Unfortunately, the region doesn't have public information for 2018 and 19 that I would wanted to present it. I couldn't get it from all the countries. But what I present here in the light orange data is year by year the total number of deaths. It's around 100,000 each year. And it has been constant along the decade of action, the first decade of action, as the same as happened in the world. This is the total. And the other thing that I always like to point is that if you add the deaths year by year, you end up with a huge amount of people that are dying. And if you extrapolate this to the decade, it's almost 900,000 people that died during the decade. That's something totally unaccepted. And this is the situation by countries. You see that in the region we have the very differences. We have Brazil and Mexico, which are the biggest countries in the region, and they have the larger number of fatalities. Then you have Colombia, Argentina, Peru, and you have the rest of the countries with less. This graph, you see year by year, the way the deaths were along the decade. And here you can see the deaths per 100 inhabitants. And the situation is very different. You see Dominican Republic with 28 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants, followed by Bolivia with 21, El Salvador 20, Brazil 19. So the situation is different when you see it in the rates per 100,000 inhabitants. This is something that is very important to know the deaths per transport mode. In the region, we have almost 70% of the deaths are vulnerable road users. So that's our priority. We have 38 pedestrians, 26 motorcyclists, 5% bicycles, and 31% people that are really on the car. And that's growing. Each year you see more vulnerable road users that are dying on roads. You just heard Felipe Lota say that in Colombia, more than 50% of the deaths are motorcyclists. That happens in many countries in Latin America, and it's growing. The motorcycle fleet is growing in the region, and the motorcyclist deaths are growing in the region. At the end of the decade, we find that still 3 countries in the region don't have a national road safety plan. And as a balance, we see that 8 countries have less deaths. That's good. But 12 countries have more deaths than when the decade of action started. Some of the progresses that the region made, we have new road safety lead agencies. That's very good news. We have in Argentina, in Colombia, in Dominican Republic, Paraguay, Uruguay. In other countries, we have other agencies that are not lead agencies but have made progress. We have national road safety plans in almost every country. We have more awareness of road safety. That's for sure. In the decade, the awareness of the importance of road safety and working in road safety grew. We have in some countries new legislation on road safety that we have made progress. We have successful programs in some countries and cities. And that's very important because we can use those cases to promote successful programs in other countries and cities. We have developed and applied some motorcycle safety plans that, since that's one of the vulnerable road users in the region, that's important. The same for pedestrians. We have an increased amount of infrastructure for bicycles, and now with the COVID and the use of bicycles more and more, we have made a lot of progress in urban road safety plans that I think it's something important. I'd like to show you how the road safety lead agencies are in Latin America. We start with COSEBI, which is from Costa Rica. It's the oldest one. It's around 30 years. It's the oldest road safety agency. The Colombian Road Safety Agency, the one from Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile. Those are the ones that are road safety lead agency. There's another ones that I like to present different, that are road safety agencies, but they have more topics that are of their responsibility, traffic, transport, and others. This is one from Dominican Republic, Panama, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Brazil. And we have others like CONAPRA in Mexico that is it's a prevention in general, health prevention organization, and we have a council in Peru. That's like a regional view. We have something very important in the region, that is FICPI. FICPI is the Ibero-American Federation of Victims Association. It has been working for 10 years already, working in most of the countries, promoting the work with victims, but also promoting road safety programs. And I think this is a very important asset of the region and of the, as a result of the decade of action. And we have OISEVI, that is the regional road safety observatory, that is also an asset of the region, having an observatory of what happens in the region. It has the data of the fatalities and injuries, but also promotes programs in the region, and I think that's very important. On the legislation of risk factors, I picked the ones that need more work in the region, which is the first one is vehicle standards. We're very behind. No country in the region has signed the UP29 United Nations regulations of the minimum standards that should be applied to vehicle standards. So it's one of the topics that we need to work in this new decade. On speed, we've made progress. Some countries have reduced the speed limit in urban areas. And some speed management programs have been put in place, but a lot needs to be worked on speed. That is so important in road safety. And child restraint systems is something that also we need to promote more on the regulation in the region. Yeah, I'd like to make a brief analysis of how I see some of the important issues on road safety in the region. The first one is authority and leadership. One of the things that I want to highlight here is we have new lead agencies, but what I find many times in these lead agencies is that they need more leadership, more authority in order to really make the changes that are needed to have the safe system approach really put in place. Enforcement, good enforcement is one of the things that the region, I think, needs to work more and more. The importance of good enforcement, well done, using IT, using a good procedure. When the fine is done, making it being paid, or go all the way to the change of the sanctionatory put in place, so that people really know that they're going to be enforced. And if you do enforcement with a good campaign, you have the change in behavior. That's something that I think the region needs it a lot. Traffic victims response offices. We need to have offices that work with victims. There are too many victims and they don't have a place to go and someone to really respond to all the needs they have. The driver license process and requirements is something that the region has been talking from the beginning of the decade. There's a Carta Iberoamericana, Ibero-American Charter for driver license that was signed for the countries at the beginning of the decade, but it hasn't been put in place. And I think that's something that needs a little push in this new decade. Safe infrastructure is something that will take a long time to change the way the infrastructure is planned, is built, and is operated. Changes have been done, but a lot needs to be done. In data, the same. We have more data, but we need to work a lot in order to have better data. IT roads, radars, they're all over the region. They started to put radars to enforce speed, especially, but it needs more. The justice system is, I think, something that needs to be worked a lot. The justice system still is not aware of road safety as a whole, the real causes of and solutions for traffic accidents still needs a lot of work. From the legislation, legislators, the Congresses, I think progress has been made. There are many countries we have in Congress people that work on road safety. I think that's something important. The relationship between urban and rural areas. Here you have examples for some countries. So the urban deaths versus rural, and it's something that is it's big. The urban areas, we have a lot of fatalities, and due to that, many cities and regions in the region are starting to work actively in road safety. And finally, I want to show something around motorcycles in the region. The first thing that I'd like to highlight is the use of the bicycle as a family vehicle. And you see some pictures, almost all taken by me in the region. We have people that work on motorcycles. We have people that use a motorcycle as a public transportation. We have people that use it as sports, that is the less. And we have people that use the motorcycle as a bicycle. So we need to understand when we work in the region around motorcycle safety, the real magnitude and the types of users that we have on the motorcycles. Andres?
Hilda, thank you very much for this particular section of your presentation, where you have highlighted a lot of the situation. And at the beginning, it struck me that you mentioned a very high proportion of vulnerable road users. But I just wanted to extend a little bit that particular conversation. Vulnerability is very relative. And while, yes, that increase and what you've shown in the motorcycle fatality is indeed staggering. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that relationship between different vulnerable road users, for example, motorcyclists and pedestrians. And what is the situation in Latin America in terms of that?
Yes, Andres, that's a good question, because I'm very careful to put the vulnerable road users as vulnerable, but they're also in some moments the ones that cause the accidents. For instance, the motorcyclists, they have in general lack of good training, of good awareness. There are many young people that drive the motorcycles not in a proper way, and many of the people that are run over in the region are run over by motorcycles. So they're vulnerable, but they're also cause accidents of other road users, basically of pedestrians. And with the growth of bicycles, something similar is happening. The cyclists are very vulnerable, and the deaths are growing. But sometimes the bicycles also can generate an accident. So yes, we need to take into account that they're vulnerable, but they also can cause accidents.
And one final aspect here before we go to the next section. You were talking about the agencies and the different agencies that have developed over time, some over 30 years ago, and they're some of the challenges they have. What do you think, or how do you think they could be improved to make them more effective and have more teeth, in a sense, to be effective in implementing preventative and control interventions?
Here, I'd like to present a little bit my personal experience when I was the director of the Colombian agency. I was very surprised that the agency had a lot of money because it has a good budget. But when you try to do things, you're not allowed to, because you don't have the responsibility. If you want to put signals in a road, you're not allowed to put the signs on the roads. If you want to enforce certain type of risk factors, you don't decide what the police does. And in many topics of you don't present a bid to the Congress, you have to go through the minister. So I think we need to rethink the road safety agencies and their functions, because many times I have my personal experience in Colombia, but I've worked with other agencies in the region. I know that the things that they can really do in road safety, that is such a broad topic that has so many areas to work in, it's not easy. And I don't have the solution, but it's something that needs to be think how the road safety lead agencies can really be responsible for all the topics and all the programs that need to be put in place in order to have the safe system approach in the countries.
Thank you, Hilda. Let's continue. I'm being mindful of the time, and I don't want to occupy this. And there are some questions popping up, so I want to have time to address those. Please continue with the presentation.
Okay, Andres, thank you very much. Okay, the challenges. The first one, the big one, the biggest one is we have to reduce in this decade, 2020, 2030, 50% the number of people injured and deaths. So that's a big challenge and goal. The first thing that I think needs to be done is really have road safety as a national priority, but a real national priority, not only of the government, but of the country. We have to put in place the safe system approach in all the magnitude of that, what that is. We need real political will. And here I have to say that I was very disappointed when I saw the new UN resolution for the new decade of action. Only 2 countries from Latin America signed it. So we need real political will. We need lead agencies, as I mentioned before, with trained people, with finance, with real leadership. And we need to have a better data analysis and information in the region. We don't have much traffic crash analysis, deep analysis. We don't have. We have to put that in place in order to really know the causes of the accidents in our region. I like to put in the first place the victims. We need to have a care for the victims. We have to avoid them, but they exist, and we have to take care of them. There's a very American comprehensive guide for traffic crash victims. We have to put that in place, and that guidance has a recommendation for post-crash care, physiological care of the victims and the families, legal guidance, response offices. That's something that we need to work in the region. Another topic is road safety at work. This is something that in the region we haven't worked a lot, and is, you know, that in the world this is very important. The accidents that occur during the work time, when in delivery, when you walk to work or working, goods transportation, public transportation, the people that go by car. I believe that if we put in place work-related road safety programs in the companies, in the enterprises, we will have a reduction in fatalities. This is something from Europe, speed management program. But I think this is something that will make a big difference. The other thing that we need is to work for vulnerable road safety, vulnerable users, for sure. And one of the things that I've learned is that it's good to have a national or regional road safety plan, but there you have to have specific programs for each vulnerable user, to have the whole perspective of what those users need, pedestrians, cyclists, power two-wheelers. Some examples of what happens of vulnerable users. The one in the right up, it's a metro in the region that was the day before the inauguration, the launch of the metro. It was high tech, the latest technology, but when you went to the street, you saw that the pedestrians, that means the users of the metro, didn't have where to walk in a safe way. We have to work more and more on that. And I like to show the figure in the bottom of what happens to motorcyclists and cyclists a lot in the region when they transit along with the big cars, that the vector effect, the wind that's around the truck, makes the power two-wheelers or cyclists fall down. And those are things that need to be taken account that normally are not. We need to work on safe infrastructure a lot. We need to make road safety audits mandatory in all projects that we make in urban areas and in rural areas. That has made progress, but more needs to be done. And inspections to identify where there is risk areas in the roads, in the actual network. We need to have safe design for all users. That means taking in account pedestrians, bicycles, motorcycles when we design roads. That is not something that, I'm a civil engineer. When I was taught to design roads, I wasn't taught to design roads for pedestrians, no, only cars. So we need to have safety for all in the design. And that's something related with that. We need to update road design manuals with the new views of forgiven roads, of when we need to take in account in a road to make it safer. We need to reduce the risk on roads. Once we identify where we have the risk zones, start fixing them to reduce the risks. And that's something that the last one, transition on rural and urban roads. That's something in the region happens a lot when you're in a rural road that crosses a town. And that's where many of the crashes occur, because there's not a good transition between the rural road with high speed and the urban road. That's something that needs to be carefully analyzed and resolved. Enforcement, as I said before, we need the lead agencies to be able to define what type of enforcement should be done, or what are the priorities of enforcement, and coordinate them with good campaigns so that they are more effective. At the national level, we have a police that work mainly on the main network, but we have lots of areas of network that are not being enforced. In cities and regions, that happens a lot. There are many cities that don't have any kind of enforcement in the region. So we need to analyze that, because we need to have enforcement everywhere if we want to change the behavior. We made progress putting radars on roads to enforce speed, but we need to make more and more progress. Vehicle safety is one of the things that we are behind. Here for the Spanish-speaking people, I left the pictures in Spanish. We need to have the legislation change to include at least the minimum safety standards of UN. And we need to promote and spread Latinenca results. There's a study last year to analyze how the region is in terms of road vehicle standards, and it analyzes the situation of how, if we change the standards and if we can reduce the deaths. And this is something that the region needs a lot. Andres, do you want to comment something, or I continue?
Yes, just in the spirit of time, and I was going to ask you some questions, but I'm actually going to read some questions of our audience. Mike Dresness asks, how should e-bikes and e-scooters be managed, legislated, and controlled to ensure road safety?
Well, that's a very important topic. Actually, I was going to include it and I didn't, because right now the main problem is the one that I've included, but we have the scooters and the e-bikes and many other new types of modes of transportation that are coming to the region. I think we should legislate that. We can legislate it so that it's not, so that they're not an additional risk. For instance, for scooters, we have to define where they can ride, that it should be in a bike lane. We have to speak about the speed limit. The number of persons that can be in the scooter, that is one. So we can and we need to do it because they're growing in the region.
Thank you, Hilda. I'm going to read one more question and then allow you to continue in the last section of your presentation, and the remaining questions we have ample time still to have a great discussion. So I'm going to read one more question. Margie Peden asks that she would like to hear your thoughts on the promotion of active transport during COVID-19 and how we can capitalize on the good outcomes. For example, reduce pollution, improved exercise, reduced circulatory diseases or chronic diseases versus the challenges of vulnerable road user deaths that you show in the region. So what are those challenges or maybe opportunities we have given the current pandemic?
I think the pandemic gave a wonderful opportunity to rethink the ways we transport, mainly in cities, and especially to promote cycling, walking, and that in the region has grown a lot. I think in almost all big cities in the region, we have pop-up cycle lanes that now are permanent, are starting and people realize that's important. And the pop-up bike lanes have a lot of traffic. And when you see the bike lane with a lot of bicycles, people understand the importance of that. So I think one of the positive consequences of the situation we have lived this year is the promotion of cycling and pedestrian and the new view of the city, of the transport in cities. And I think that's wonderful. Because not only for the health issues of making exercise, but also from the road safety perspective, is modes that we want to promote.
One thing that I want to bring up that you mentioned in this section particularly is the large proportion of people who use, who rely on transport for their livelihood. They use it for work. In the context of this pandemic also, and in the current situation, and with the trends that we were seeing even before, with all this gig economy, things like Uber Eats and all these companies that are popping up, tell us a little bit how you think people can be protected from the perspective of transport safety while also addressing their economic needs, particularly in the context of the region of Latin America.
I think it's something that we need to work a lot on. I mentioned the work-related programs that need to be put in place in the region. We have to find a way to make those who hire motorcyclists, cyclists, to work, to make deliveries, to be responsible for their safety. Right now, they're mostly apps, and they say, we're an app, we don't have transportation, and they're not our employers. I think we need to have a legislation that makes the company that hires this kind of people responsible for their safety, for the training, for the hours that they work, for the vehicle, for all the devices that they need to protect themselves. That's a very important topic, and we need to work on it.
Thank you, Hilda. And now I'd love to hear what recommendations you have for the particular, for the region overall. So please go ahead.
Okay, Andres, thank you very much. Here I'm going to present some recommendations based on what I already explained, and I'm going to compare it to link it to the document that the Academic and Expert Group organized for the 3rd Global Ministerial Conference on Road Safety says. So that this is the title of the document that I guess all of you know, or you don't know them, please read it. I think it's a wonderful approach of what needs to be done in the next decade. So I start here. The first column is my recommendation in general. The second one is the topics that I think need to be addressed. And finally is the academic and expert group recommendation linked to that. So the first one is related to road safety as a national priority. As I mentioned from the beginning of my presentation, we need to have a safe system approach really put in place. We need lead agencies, we need data. And I related that a little bit with the procurement step by the academic and expert group that says, okay, when you're going to procure from the government anything, the construction, the building of a road or transportation for a group of people, anything, include road safety indicators and road safety requirements for those who you are going to hire. I think that's something that hasn't been done and that will make a big difference. The second one is traffic victim response. I talked about that. We need to have a comprehensive care of the victims with medical, psychological, and legal guidance. We have to make a capacity building within the justice system so that they can understand the importance of a fair justice when an accident occurs. And some countries in the region have started to do that, to have special people that work in justice that know about road safety and can make good decisions when they're leading with an accident. The work-related road safety, work-related programs, responsibility of those who hire, as I mentioned a while ago. And that is related with the academic and expert group, the sustainable practices and reporting that is based on that. Okay, big companies should have a sustainable practice and report on the results of road safety at the end of the year. We need, and the procurement also. Safe infrastructure, we need to have the road safety audits, inspections, reduce risks on roads, train road safety professionals, they have adequate safe speed limits. That is related with the infrastructure recommendation from the expert group. Safe vehicles, update safety legislation, promote Latin NCAP, enhance motor vehicle inspections, and that is related to the Safe Vehicles academic and expert group. Vulnerable user safety, we have to have road safety programs for each user. We need infrastructure for vulnerable users. And that I related with the child and youth safety recommendation from the expert group, as well as the modal shift. Enforcement, we need proper enforcement, and that is a little bit related to the technology recommendation from the expert group. And speed management programs, we need to have speed limits as safe system approach says. It's related to the zero speeding of the academic and expert group. And finally, I want to highlight and keep here that we need to update the driver license requirements and procedures in the region. I think that's one of the important things that we need. Final remarks, I put it in Spanish so the Spanish people can read it well. In Latin America, we made progress. The decade of action, we made progress, but we need much more in this new decade in order to achieve the new UN goal. We have vaccines, we can do it. Thank you very much.
Hilda, thank you very much for this presentation. There are several comments and questions that I would like to address. Before addressing to that, and knowing that first our speaker from Colombia is heading the national agency in Colombia, that you yourself have headed it. When confronted with a reality, such a complex reality where there are requirements on enforcement, on management overall of a variety of institutions, of capacity building, of infrastructure needs, of behavioral issues that could be addressed, of a wide system or system-wide needs. How do you prioritize as a leader or as a decision maker? What is the process, or how would you prioritize this whole set of problems that you have highlighted for the particular region of Latin America?
it's not easy when you have to do it. It's very easy when you tell someone to do it. You need to work at these 10 topics at the same time. But when you have to do it, it's not that easy. I think at the beginning, you can work on speed management. I think that's something that you can do relatively easy way. You have to take care of the victims. And I think you can do something on risk roads with signals, at least at the beginning with signals, and that you can help identify where the risks are. And campaigns, that good focus campaigns combined with enforcement. So when I prioritize, I talk about 5 things. Doing one only is difficult.
Thanks, Hilda. You know, the topic of the motorcycle has come out several times, and there are some technological issues that or fixes that could potentially reduce the interactions, the negative interactions that you highlighted between pedestrians and motorcycle riders. For example, the use of the ABS systems for or combined braking standards for motorcycles that would reduce or address distance, direction, and handling of the motorcycles. Tell us a little bit about this. How is that done in Latin America? Has that been addressed?
Unfortunately, not. I mentioned that the vehicle safety standards is one of the things that we need to work in. It's not just for vehicles, it's also for motorcyclists. And the APC brakes is something that is needed to be mandatory in all countries in Latin America, and it isn't right now. It's in the process of being included, but right now it is not. So that's one important topic. But there's another one, trucks. The big trucks. If you put a barrier on the side, that is something it's really cheap to put a barrier between the second wheel and the last one. It helps a lot to the venturi effect that I showed in the graph, that the motorcycles get under the wheels, just putting that barrier. So there are many things that you can do that are not very expensive when you analyze what really happens. The mirrors that you use in Europe that are wider and you can see more, they're very important for vulnerable users. So yes, we can do many things that help. When I talk about making special programs for each vulnerable user, those are the things that I think that should be analyzed.
And Hilda, you have obviously laid out quite a fair amount of challenges. You indeed have also laid out some activities and some actions that have occurred in the region that indicate a lot of progress. You showed at the beginning, I recall a very diverse set of statistics that show higher risk in some countries than others. But that risk is different between countries. Some countries, the use of the motorcycle is more prevalent. In other countries, it's the automobile. In other countries, it's pedestrians. From a regional perspective, how do you prioritize, or how do you think, if you were in a regional agency, how would you prioritize all of these different issues? Obviously, what I'm trying to get at here is the importance of the local context, and how even within a country that is very different. So when you adopt interventions, they need to be contextualized locally. Tell us a little bit, within your experience, how can that be achieved within a nation or between nations?
As you say, all the countries are different. You can't generalize. And when you want to promote one specific program around the region, it's not so easy. We have different political changes and different situations in each country. But I guess you can do it. We can promote things there. For instance, I think one of the things that need to be promoted in the region is the work-related programs. And I think that's something, if you have a country that has a good example, a case study about it. You can go with that case study to the other countries and show that someone in the region already did it. That helps a lot.
Thank you, Hilda. Well, we have seen with Hilda's presentation a complex array of challenges, of solutions. We have seen, how the economy melds also with the variety of infrastructural, legislative, and behavioral challenges in the region. A very complex situation that requires complex but possible answers. One thing that I particularly like of Hilda's approach is that we do have answers. We do have answers to address these problems, and these answers can be actually applied in an efficient way or a more effective way within each nation, within each country, or throughout the entire region, or even globally. To give our audience a little bit more participation, I'm going to read some of several questions that have come up. And so, Hilda, I'm going to read these questions and will allow you to answer them live. Alex Quitzberg asks, or mentions that there's another form of motorcycle that is growing in the region, and it is the three-wheelers, the rickshaws. Could you talk a little bit about the regulation that occurs in this particular regions? In the past decade, they have increased in smaller and mid-sized cities. Can you talk a little bit about the regulation of rickshaws and this issue?
Yes, from what I know in the region, I don't remember what country in South and Central America that has a special regulation for three-wheelers. In some two countries that have regulation for three-wheelers. Actually, I think that the three-wheelers is the solution for those who only have the option of buying a motorcycle in rural areas, in outside the big cities, and I think the three-wheelers is a solution when you cannot buy a car, not in a highway, not in the city, but I think it is something that needs research and needs more regulation, but I think it is very important.
Thank you, Hilda. And
you can transport. There's cities, for instance, in Colombia, there are cities in Colombia that have 99% of motorcycles. When you don't have cars, only have motorcycles, how do you transport children? How do you transport people with special needs? Three-wheelers is the solution.
Thank you for that answer. And our in the audience, Navid Shirzai actually is asking something that relates to one of my comments before. You have a diverse region. Some countries are economically more affluent than others. For those countries that have lower economic resources, what is the first step or need that you have to take into consideration in areas that are least developed? What is your approach in terms of traffic safety in relation to that?
I think it's not if they're poor or not poor, how to start, because it's more related what needs to be done, how back in time out the countries in the legislation, in the enforcement, in all the different areas. So when you have to start from the basic enforcement and campaigns.
Okay, and I think the person who posed the question, Mr. Shizai, actually clarifies that what is interested in asking is the older motor pool, the older vehicles that are existing in areas that are poorer, and that might be associated. So with that older set of motor vehicles or overall motor pool. How do you address that in settings that are more socioeconomically limited or have less resources?
That's a very difficult topic. And I've seen it in some countries that you go and you see that the fleet is really old. They don't have seat belts, they don't have, and you cannot ask for them because they're too old. I think there the important thing is enforcement speed.
Very good.
If you reduce the speed, you reduce the consequences of whatever happens.
Thanks. Anil Saxleva, and I apologize if I mispronounce Saxleva. Anil asks, what about child seats in Latin America? How often do people use it, or what is the legislation around child seat use?
It's a lot more. Where many countries don't have it as a mandatory. So it's something that we're working. First of all, having the proper legislation, and then training the people how to use them. Actually, if you combine this with the last question, if you have an old car and you're going to buy a child seat, sometimes the child seat can be more expensive than the car. So it's something that is not easy when you have poor societies to buy these seats that normally are important from other countries and are expensive. So that's a challenge. But I can tell you that in some countries in region, more children drive as pedestrians, as motorcycle users, or as bicycle users than in cars.
Thanks, Hilda. And Suraj Kishwan Misier is asking a really interesting question that you mentioned in part of your presentation, the development of agencies in the region. And you actually differentiated them, some that are more structured, some that are less structured, that have a more general role of prevention. How can countries without an agency, or with a weaker agency for that matter, be helped in the formation of an agency if it doesn't exist, or the strengthening of one agency? How can countries find help on developing, for example, road safety plans when there is no agency, for example? So one question is, how can you develop an agency?
I think something
in
that
place, and then how can
yes,
you
I think
strengthen,
something
or
that is can be.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. No, something that you can put in place very easily is make a council. Have a council, a road safety council, where all the agency that needs to be incorporated, including private sector, including NGOs, organize a council, have a very good leader, a very good secretariat that pushes the topics, and you can do it as a secretary. And you have, but a strong secretary.
Thank you. And when looking at the vulnerable road users, and especially pedestrians, there can be some misclassification issues of data. Mike Dresens asks that, for example, work zone safety is overlooked in many regions, and in the case of Latin America, that is true. When you have a crash in a work zone, sometimes it's classified as or reported as a pedestrian crash, but really that work zone issue is not accurately reported. And I know in the last set of your slides, you actually recommended, crash analysis, investigation, etc., perhaps more detail in that. So what is being done to address that problem when a lot of the fatalities that occur in work zones maybe are misclassified or not adequately documented?
I totally agree with Mike. That's a very important topic that normally I try to be a little bit brief for this presentation. but it's something that really needs more work. And we have many fatalities in work zones. It's part of what I call the re-education, retraining of engineers to be aware of that, to be aware of the importance of dealing with the road users in the construction areas, and also to identify what happens and to document what happened. I think it's a very important topic. I agree with Mike, and I think it's very important.
Thanks, Hilda. Victor Valencia from the academy, or the academia, the academic sector in Colombia, he asks, how can the academic sector contribute? And they, certainly the academic sector can provide evidence, can do analyses, can do research. How do you think can the academic sector contribute in a better way to have public agencies use the information and the evidence that they produce to benefit society overall?
I think the first thing that we need in the region a lot is good road safety training. So one of the things that we need from the academia is good safety training in general, and specific for road engineers, for architects, for psychologists, for doctors. We need good road safety programs, and we need research. We have very few research on road safety in the region, and that is something that needs to be done with the authorities. And but it is very needed to understand what really happens in Latin America. We normally use the vaccines from other sides of the world. We need to put them in place for our reality. So I think the academic has a very important role here.
And on that issue, our colleague Samina Parveen asks or mentions in India, for example, the issue of good, reliable, robust data on road injuries and deaths is important. Or how do you ensure that good data are collected, but that those good data are used actually to prioritize and to, in effect, lead to policy or implementation of interventions? How do you go from data to action in Latin America? How do you address that particular issue?
I think we work with the data that we have in each country. In general, each country works with the data that they have. What we need to do is to promote better data. We need to promote crash analysis. In almost all our countries, we don't do in-depth crash analysis, and that we need it to really know the causes. When you analyze the causes of the accidents in the region, you see that most of the times the reason is bad behavior of the driver. The vehicle responsibility is very low. The infrastructure responsibility is also very low because there's no deep analysis of the crashes.
Thank you. Hormosa Kerry asks, I'm not sure I understand this question, but if you have any proposal or program in the field of public awareness or a campaign as a priority for the country. I'm not sure I'm understanding the full question, but I'm interpreting it like that.
No, what I would say around campaigns is I don't suggest to do broad campaigns. I think it's better to focus on one topic and be direct. We're going to work on the use of seat belts and make a campaign around seat belts, the benefits of using or not using a seat belt, and enforcing seat belts. I think that produces more results than making a general campaign, behave on roads. I think we need to be focused.
And Hilda, if we talk a little bit more about vehicles, the actual engineering of vehicles, Oscar Ordóñez brings up an issue that is really interesting and that surely occurs in many other places in the world. It is that people, purchase vehicles, but they modify the vehicles to adapt them to characteristics that they actually need. For example, increasing the capacity of a vehicle to bear certain weights, etc., modifying it themselves. How is this particular issue addressed in Latin America, given this sort of home-made adaptations of vehicles that are constructed, presumably to address certain safety characteristics, but then are modified after they are purchased?
That's a very important topic. And it does occur a lot, not only trucks, buses, but also in motorcycles. There are there's some places in the region where people buy the motorcycle, they take off the mirror, they take off the many parts of the lights because they think they're not cool. That happens. How that should be addressed with the motor inspections. I think the process of motor inspection can deal with that. If we have a good motor inspection process put in place, we can reduce that.
And that gets a little bit back to a particular issue. You mentioned that there might be legislation, et cetera, but the enforcement in this particular case is really important. So that strengthening of the enforcement at that level is also another issue. It's not only within the system as it works, but rather in this particular setup of the motor vehicle inspections, the strengthened enforcement and standards need to be existing there too.
Yes, enforcement is something that needs to be taken in account in the region. Actually, there's a project that has been running around the region but hasn't been concreted. Is that to make an organization as FICPI for victims, as the Observatory for Data for the police of the region, to make an organization as it happens in Europe, that you have the TISPOL, I think is the name, that it's the organization of the police, and they work together in procedures, in training, in sharing good best practices. I think that for the region will be very important, because when you make those regional meetings or organizations, countries learn a lot from the other one, and I think that would be a good idea for the region.
Thanks, Hilda. And Liliana Castellanos actually brings a really interesting and important topic that is very relevant for Latin America. At the regional level, as you have highlighted, the motorcycle has become a very important vehicle. You mentioned some cities that have, up to 90% of the motor pool is actually motorcycles. The motorcycle used as a family vehicle, as a mode of transportation. You showed some pictures in one of your slides. What is the relationship between that increased use of the motorcycle as a family vehicle and the absence of public transportation of good quality? And by absence, I'm not talking only about the lack of existence, but also maybe extremely expensive when it's high quality, or not affordable, or not accessible. So can you talk a little bit about the interaction between the increased use of these modes of transportation and that conflict or lack of sort of existence or accessibility to quality public transportation?
Yes. There's a big relationship between both, certainly. The use of the motorcycle as public transportation occurs in many areas where there's no public transportation, or is very poor. And the same occurs to the use of motorcycle as a bus, school bus, because there's no school bus or transportation. So it is, if we don't want children to be in motorcycles, we have to provide good, school buses and public transportation, so that people have the opportunity to have a good and safe transportation and don't need to use the motorcycle.
There's also a big issue here related. It's the economic issue. Some of the, I mean, in some Latin American countries, some of the motorcycles that you can purchase are actually very cheap. And so paying a monthly fee to buy a motorcycle or a scooter is actually cheaper than paying what you would need to access your work or do your errands or whatever using public transportation. So the economic conflict here is very important. In addition to that, the mobility conflict. There are some cities that are overcrowded with transport, you know, excessive transport, bad infrastructure. You have traffic jams constantly. And while some of those cities might have good transport, public transport, the affordability issue and the mobility issue enter into conflict and force people to migrate to perhaps a more flexible way of using a transport mode such as motorcycles. But at the same time, that increases their vulnerability, as you well have shown. So how do you address that, this conflicts and this economic and mobility challenges that are leading to the changes that we have seen in the region in terms of modal use?
It's something that certainly happens. In some research done in the region, it shows that in big cities, many people switch to motorcycle because of congestion. It's not only the price, it's not only the economy, but it's congestion leads to use the motorcycle. There are many professionals that say the only way to work is with motorcycle, or I won't get to the other place. So it is what we need to put in place is a safe way to, we need to have the cities with safety for all users, including motorcycles, cyclists, everybody, because that's something that really is happening in the cities, and it will keep on happening. And with the restriction of the use of public transportation due to COVID-19, it is expected that many more people buy motorcycles. Some have bought and used bicycle, but many are buying motorcycles. So in order not to use the public transportation for COVID issues.
Thank you. You know, you've mentioned a lot of these events that occur and that affect vulnerable road users. Sarosh Kumar Pradam asks about first responders, and how are they managed in Latin America? What is the situation of first responders in terms of what is being done regionally? What are the challenges there?
I think we have big differences from one country to another. There are some countries that have very good emergency care and response, and some that don't. So I think we cannot generalize. There's a study done by FICPI, the Victims Association, that they analyzed, for instance, something very simple. If the country has a number, a unique number to call for attention, and many countries don't have the unique number, the 911 that many countries have. But I think there are big differences from one country to another. There are some very, very poor, and there are some good ones.
Thanks, Hilda. Mark Schotten asks about the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, which is identified by him as a best case country, cycling has a modal share of about 27% of all trips, both urban and rural. Given that many people in low and middle income countries, as well as developed countries, are unable to physically ride a bike or are uncomfortable doing so, along with the dangers of the road, etc., and the infrastructure cost, is it realistic in Latin America to focus on promoting a modal shift to cycling as part of a road safety strategy?
It is. It is, and the proof is what has happened with the COVID-19. situation that has promoted a lot the use of bicycle. But in some cities, it had begun before the COVID-19, and it has worked. We can see Buenos Aires, we can see Bogota, we can see some cities in Mexico. So we have examples of cities that's normally done in cities, city by city. But it is feasible, and the epidemic is helping us to promote it.
In the particular case, returning back to the agencies, Victor Valencia asks or comments that you suggested that the national agency in Colombia has made some effective investments in implementation of road safety. But could you specify a little bit better how would you need to rethink these institutions to make them more effective? I know they have their limitations. They are charged with quite a burden and quite a mission, but how can you make them more effective? What would the main strategy be to make these particular agencies be more effective in implementing interventions, but also in addressing policy issues?
One of the things that I've always thought is that the road safety agency should be in a higher level in the government than just the minister. Why? Because in road safety, you have to work with the health minister, with the work minister, labor minister, with the education minister, with the public works or transportation ministry. So I think if you manage to have a higher level in the government, like from presidency or anything like that, that can coordinate better, that would be important. And the other thing is to enable the agencies to be more active. For instance, if you're going to do something in roads, it must be, they must be able to promote programs and implement them with the road agencies, but be more active and enable them to do more. And in all areas of road safety, I think it needs something that enables the agency to do things. It can't do everything. No.
Are there any particular areas of government that the road agency should be interacting more? Obviously, Ministry of Transport is one, but what other areas, or you know, at a national level, there's certainly a set of activities, but traffic injuries occur in local settings. So how do you translate a lot of these interactions to the municipal setting? How do you look at all these interactions at the state or municipal level?
I think Luis Lota's presentation talks about that, how they are working with the local agencies, local authorities to work with. I think that works a lot. And when you go to the local governments, they're always very open to work with the national agency. I think that's easier than working with other ministries.
In Latin America, certainly there are a lot of good examples on road traffic safety and other interventions that actually originate in the municipal level. The role of the mayors of cities in many countries in Latin America, or the local role, the local implementation of policies, the local adaptation and evaluation of interventions actually has led to an increase or a replication or a scale up of a lot of interventions upwards, not from national to local, but rather from local to national. So there are some really good examples in the region that we can draw from, both from the policy and implementation or even the management perspective, but also from the perspective of methodological evaluation, use of data, and production of data. How can this be promoted more in the region?
I think from the city level, you can make more progress, obviously. And the proof is what has happened in the region. The projects that have been implemented in cities have been a success in many cities, and in countries not so much, because it's easier from a local perspective to really coordinate all the organizations you need to take in account to promote the program and to implement it and see the results. Yes, we need to work with regions and cities because of that. And also because most of the fatalities and the crashes occur in cities.
Right, exactly. You mentioned that in your data, very, very high proportions of transport injury events occurring in urban settings. Talking a little bit about data, Navid Sherzai is curious about some particular methods, the empirical based method, or some very specific statistical methodologies. Tell us a little bit about what innovative data-oriented methodologies or data capture strategies are being used to record information or evaluate interventions in Latin America that you know of.
Honestly, like something very innovative? No. What I think is important is to take into account that in all countries you have information from the police, you have information from the health sector, and you need to put them together and have one final data. And that's not easy. It's not easy to put together and forensics information. It's not easy to have one single final data. I think that's a challenge, more than a sophisticated way to get the information on the road.
And in the process of integrating, just coming back a little bit to the agencies and the agency that you headed some time ago in Colombia, while there are a lot of efforts to integrate, there are a lot of hurdles. Oscar Ordóñez points out that, despite this mandates to coordinate more between the agency, the Ministry of Transport, the different infrastructure agencies that exist, particularly in the case of Colombia, for example, this progress has been very slow. What do you think is important to make this process more efficient, to integrate and to have these agencies work in a more efficient way in that integration?
Organizations that need to work together for road safety?
Yes.
I think it needs a good leadership from the agency and good leadership and sharing the knowledge of what needs to be done, what really have good results, and engaging everyone to work together. Good leadership.
Okay, and what is your sense about what is called the master mobility plans that have created in as a national transportation sort of policy? The plans, many times contain projects, programs that can be used to execute at the local level, addressing mobility, road safety. Talk a little bit about master plans, master mobility plans.
I think master mobility plans are a very good tool to plan the mobility in a country, like in a country level. But I've seen very few master plans that include road safety as one of the objectives of the plan. Normally is we need to transport and transport people and goods. How do we do that? I think one of the new things that need to be implemented in all the countries is when you make a master plan, include road safety as one of the goals of the plan as a national level. But even more, when you make master plans for cities, for mobility plans for cities. And that is something that already started in some cities in Latin America to include road safety as one of the main goals of a urban mobility master plan. Some years ago, it didn't exist. It's something that started to be included, and it's very important to include safety as one of the priorities. We don't need only to bring people and goods from one place to another, but make them arrive to the other side. We need road safety.
Coming back to the data issue, a variety of countries, our colleague Margie Peden highlights that, indeed, to improve traditional data systems, crowdsourced information is being used in some places. Do you know of experiences or that occur in Latin America that might be using this type of information collection?
For fatality data, I don't know.
Yeah, to address road safety, how can you do you know of examples that use crowdsourcing information? For example, to give you just a very specific example, applications like Waze that is very much used in Latin America. People input whether or not there's a traffic event, and so it's crowdsourced. It's fed by the users. Are there any tools or are there any examples of this level of information or this source of information being used for traffic safety?
Yes. Now that you mentioned Waze, I know that, for instance, in Costa Rica, they have an agreement with Waze. The policeman has an agreement with Waze to know where the accidents occur and to get information from them. Yes. Actually, in Colombia, there was an example of making road safety campaigns with Waze. I think we can use them. Since everybody has Waze in their cars and they use it, if you make road safety messages in Waze, you can have a wide spread of the information. I think that those are methods that need to be put in place because they're very good. They're a very good source of information, and we need to use them more and more.
And our colleague, just complementing that, our colleague María Gómez is highlighting that while governments may not be collecting crowdsourced information, there are actually several companies operating in the region. And in fact, the regional in the regional observatories, and just she's highlighting that on a meeting of the regional observatories that will take place in December 8 to 10 of this year, that is going to be a particular topic. So for those of you who are interested in looking at crowdsourcing and this data collection method, which is increasingly being used globally, that's a venue to look at, and that's a topic to address. Our colleague Victor Pavarino from the Pan American Health Organization mentions that in Latin America, how do you see the possibility of tackling road safety issues along and integrated with other health-related issues such as air pollution, sedentary lifestyle overall?
Okay, just a brief compliment to the last question. I think technology, as the academic and expert group mentions, we need to put technology and new technology for road safety. So I think this crowdsourcing and everything needs to be promoted and used for sure. Responding, Victor, I totally agree that the relationship between air pollution and road safety is very linked, and it should be done. Actually, when you promote sustainable transport, you include road safety, so it must be together. I agree totally with you, Victor.
Paola Flores asks, in relation to the design of lateral safety zones as a containment in roads, the guidelines in Colombia, for example, are from 2012. which makes it difficult. So how do you address some of those guidelines, update them, and account for the incredibly diverse terrain that occurs in that exists in that particular country, or for that matter in many others? How do you address that, update those particular issues?
For sure, it's one of the things that need updating in most of our countries to have a good lateral zones defined on roads. For sure, I agree totally. It's much needed. In many roads in Latin America, you see very dangerous things around the roads, and they are included in manuals. So yes, we need to update that.
Okay, and our colleague Victor Valencia mentions that coming back to the data aspect, he mentions that at the National University of Colombia in its campus in Medellin, they created a series of road safety models and state-of-the-art statistical procedures and methodologies that could be used for formulating policies that are certainly used locally in Medellin, in a municipality nearby. So there are some examples from academia. This is just one of many examples that exist that are adaptable or potentially usable in one or multiple countries. One final question I want to ask you, Hilda, before we close. We're running short on time. We've talked a lot about the region. We've talked about all the challenges that the region has. And I know, given the questions that have popped up throughout this presentation, that there are many shared challenges, many shared experiences. How do you think a lot of the agencies and the institutions that are involved in road traffic safety can collaborate globally beyond the region of Latin America with other institutions? And how can that interaction at the policy level, at the operational level, and certainly at the academic level, could be strengthened to elicit a much more strong collaboration that involves institutions that address problems that are similar? Typically, we have a lot of collaborations and influence from institutions that have very different, from developed countries that have higher incomes, that might have a very different reality in their particular countries. And that collaboration is certainly welcome. But what about the collaboration between nations or countries that have more similar realities? How would you foster that? How would you envision that improving for the benefit of Latin America, but certainly for the benefit of other regions?
I think that's a very important issue that you raise, and I agree totally with you. As a region, what has happened in the region is something that can help other regions. And actually, the ICEBI, the Ibero-American Road Safety Observatory, is something that has been exported to other regions. Maria Segui just mentioned the meeting of other observatories that is going to take place at the end of this year, of all the observatories. From the experience of the ICEBI, now there's a African observatory, there's an Asian regional observatory, and I don't remember which other one, but that was something that was exported from this region to others. And it's a very good initiative because it helps a lot when you have different countries meeting in a regional observatory, sharing experience, because it's not only the sharing of the data that's important in the observatories, the sharing of good practices, of doubts. When you have a doubt, you call your friend from the observatory. And that's very important. And I think that when the other observatories are consolidated, we can share a lot from one observatory in one region to another observatory in another region.
That's a really important message, is that interactive and that sort of multiple directions that you can learn. A colleague from Bangladesh mentions, for example, that on October 22nd in Bangladesh, there's a National Road Safety Day. I know in Latin America, there are certainly days in which mobility or cars are not allowed for a particular day. So I just want to highlight the real importance of this collaboration between countries, between the regions. I want to thank you, Hilda, very much for your intervention, for the questions. I want to ask our audience for the great questions that you have asked. I think this has made a really interesting discussion overall. And at this point, just thank the organizers once more. Hilda has given us a very comprehensive image of the situation, the challenges, but also the solutions for Latin America. So I want to hand the floor to our colleague, I think it's Kavi, for the continuation of this event. And once again, Hilda, thank you very, very much for your intervention. To our audience, thank you incredibly for your great questions, and hope you have enjoyed this session. Goodbye.
Thank you, Andres, and thank you, everybody.